Look at this mysterious square. This is a chip. It contains great power. These little ones have become so powerful in our civilization that if for some reason their production is stopped, the entire economy of the planet will stand still. But strangely enough, there is no single country, or even a powerful state, that would be an absolute leader in the production of microchips. Interesting. Why is that? How do these chips protect Taiwan from war? And how did the relationship with chips historically develop in the Soviet Union and now in Russia? Well, about everything in order. Let's go! Look at this sweet old man, who is already 91 years old. Morris Jan, who speaks beautiful English, was born in China and moved to the United States of America in 1949 at the age of 18. In America, the young man received his education at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and worked in various American companies, including 25 years as an employee. In 1975, John went to Taiwan and changed the life of the island, and indeed the whole world. In 30 years, it has become the most technologically advanced and largest microchip maker. Now the company, founded by John, is almost a monopolist in the market. It makes more than half of all the chips in the world, including the most advanced ones, less than 10 nanometers. Microchips from Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company are ordered by Apple, Nvidia, AMD, and others. Taiwan accounts for 63% of global chip production. Most likely, at the heart of the device you are watching this video from, there is a chip made there. John changed not only the world of microelectronics, but also politics. For the People's Republic of China, the return of Taiwan is still a sharp and sensitive issue, including because mainland China wants to gain the semiconductor powers of the island and become the absolute leader in microchip production. Taiwan's status as a unique country deserves a separate discussion, and we have a similar large interesting issue about it. Highly recommend to take a look. It will be interesting. And now we will continue and briefly note why it is great for China to start a war. It only takes 7 minutes for planes from China's southern air bases to attack Taiwan. The possibility of annexing the island by military means, in case of exhaustion of peaceful means, is officially written in the legislation of the People's Republic of China. However, China's attack on Taiwan threatens serious consequences. The issue is not only the potential collision of the United States of America and the use of nuclear weapons, but also the horrifying economic losses. After all, with all the military power of the People's Republic of China, it is unlikely to be able to take Taiwan without a single shot. And battles in the densely populated western part of the island could lead to the destruction of businesses that produce microelectronics. The demand for microchips is huge and exceeds the supply. If such a major producer as Taiwan suddenly leaves the market, a severe deficit will arise. A slight hiccup is enough to paralyze a whole range of industries, from electronics and telecommunications to machine building, healthcare, and public services, leaving hundreds of millions of people out of work. Many sectors, like artificial intelligence development and network expansion, would come to a complete halt. Buying a new car, smartphone, or household appliances will become more difficult. Moreover, there may start to be shortages of such critically important devices as medical equipment and industrial machinery. Meanwhile, setting up chip production in other countries would require huge amounts of money and decades. In a recent interview, former U.S. Secretary and diplomat Henry Kissinger even suggested that a military conflict around Taiwan could shatter the entire world economy. The pandemic of 2019 has already shown a small part of what can happen if the semiconductor industry stops. Due to border closures and business shutdowns around the world, there was a shortage of microchips. It hit the car market particularly hard. Partly for this reason, the United States of America is demonstrating support for Taiwan, despite not officially recognizing its sovereignty. And Chinese leaders are forced to refrain from thoughts of war, as the People's Republic of China itself heavily depends on Taiwanese production. As long as Taiwan remains a leader in the field of microchips, it ensures its own security. It's no coincidence that the country's president, Tsai Ing-wen, called chip production a stone wall. And like the cherry on top of the cake, not so long ago, Taiwan joined the so-called quantum race. 72 scientists and 24 companies have joined the team. Among them are specialists from Taiwan's largest semiconductor manufacturing companies who will be engaged in the research of quantum elements, computers, and communication systems. Taiwan's Ministry of Economy has announced the allocation of more than $10 million over the next 4 years for the development of its own quantum computers. The Ministry of Science and Technology has pledged an additional $8 million over the next 5 years. According to the Taiwanese newspaper, the world's largest Taiwanese microchip manufacturer, even before the year 2020, began poaching talented quantum computing researchers, offering them a salary 3 times higher than the original. The Taipei-based National Academy has already been able to build superconducting qubits, the basic unit of quantum information, and possesses technologies for generating and reading qubits, as well as for controlling their state. According to the president of the Academy, James Liao, the research staff of the institution has been intensively studying quantum computing technologies and quantum materials, which require miniaturization technology for 10 years. This is a strong point of silicon chips. Now let's get back to the chips and see why no country can become a leader in microchip production. The United States of America has always been a leader in the field of electronics. In the first year of 1960, microchips were freely sold here, but they were so expensive that only federal agencies could afford them, primarily the U.S. Department of Defense and National Aeronautics and Space Administration. They used chips for controlling ballistic missiles and for onboard equipment. By the mid-1960s, microchips were used in household appliances, and in the first year of the 1970s, presented the world's first microprocessor, the 4004. The micro in its name was not accidental. The size of the chips has undeniably decreased. Engineers constantly found new ways to place more transistors on a single area. As a result, chips became faster, more powerful, and energy efficient. By the 1990s, transistors had appeared that were micrometers in size. That's 1/1000th of a millimeter. Modern devices are even smaller. In 2012, the production of chips with 3-nanometer transistors began. 1 nanometer is 10 to the -9th meters, or 1/millionth of a millimeter. Thus, the transistor of a chip is 3 times smaller than an antibody, a white blood cell of our immune system. Moreover, it's not beyond the realm of possibility that even smaller transistors will appear. In the year 2020, 2-nanometer ones were demonstrated, and 1-nanometer ones are under development. The number of such transistors on a chip the size of a fingernail can be counted in tens of billions. It is thanks to the development of microelectronics that the technological leap that humanity has made over the last 70 years has become possible. And at the same time, precisely because of it, precisely because of the complexity of creating microchips, America began to lose its leadership in this field. Let's look at a simple culinary recipe for making a chip. Today, in the production of leading chips, the first is necessary: programs that can place billions of transistors on a few square centimeters. A man simply cannot cope with this task. Secondly, placement with a sterile frequency and a special air composition. Even a single speck of dust landing on the scheme can ruin the transistor, and consequently, the entire device. Thirdly, inert gases of ultra-high purity. Fourthly, high-frequency monocrystalline silicon. Fifthly, excimer lasers, the same type of gas ultraviolet lasers that are also used in eye surgery. And sixth, seventh, eighth, and many other things. Therefore, the smaller the microchips, the more difficult they are to create. For transistors smaller than a nanometer, the silicon substrate will be the size of just a few atoms. Such a complication of technology inevitably leads to specialization. If in the 1960s the same companies developed and assembled the chips, designed the equipment for production, then today, thanks to that same grandfather Jan, who spent his whole life honing a narrow specialization in production, these stages are distributed among companies all over the world. For example, only 3 companies from the United States of America, Mentor Graphics, Cadence Design Systems, and Synopsys, can create programs that design microchips. And the only manufacturer of machines, the size of a small private house and costing $170 million, capable of printing microchips less than 10 nanometers, is the Dutch ASML. At the same time, in the assembly and testing of microchips, Korea and Taiwan have no equals. In the 1960s, American companies, both then and now, holding leading positions in the production of microchips, began to open factories in strange union countries with cheap labor: Japan, South Korea, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. Not only to save money, but also to circumvent strict American legislation. In 1976, the United States passed a law on the control of toxic substances, according to which new chemicals need to be checked for safety before being introduced. Microchips presented difficulties because not only do they use toxic chemicals like arsenic, lead, and ethylene glycol ethers in their creation, but they also produce new substances unknown to humanity. The Asian tigers themselves, South Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Taiwan, which achieved high rates of economic growth in the second half of the 20th century, and Japan also invested heavily in the development of the semiconductor industry. And although American companies still lead in chip sales, from the 1990s, their share of microchips worldwide has fallen from 37% to 20%. Moreover, companies that manufacture electronics on American territory are lagging behind their Asian competitors. For example, Korean and Taiwanese mastered the 10-nanometer processor by 2016, while the American only in 2019. China also wants to become a leader in the microelectronics field. However, being the largest purchaser of microchips in the world, in 2019, China bought 34% of the world's microelectronics. In their production, the People's Republic of China is far from first place and heavily depends on other countries, including the United States of America and Taiwan. That's why China strives to create its own chips, from development to printing and assembly. In 2014, they established a fund of $150 billion for these purposes, to purchase modern equipment and technologies for microchips. But there's a problem. Foreign companies are eagerly opening factories in China, but they are not sharing their intellectual property. Because of this, China's microchip production lags about 8 years behind competitors from the United States of America, Taiwan, Korea, and Japan. The Pentagon considers China the main threat to national security, and American politicians are putting sticks in the wheels of Chinese industry and microelectronics. For example, under pressure from the Trump administration, the Dutch government banned the company from selling advanced equipment to Chinese companies from 2019. American politicians fear that the People's Republic of China is using the achievements of foreign countries against them. And not without reason, because in the People's Republic of China, private companies are obliged to hand over their modern technologies to the army. In October 2012, the United States of America imposed a ban on the sale of microchips and equipment for them, as well as software, to the People's Republic of China.
The latter not only hinders the People's Republic of China from creating modern microelectronics independently, but also from purchasing technologies from other countries as they
Judging by everything, these measures are working. The largest microchip manufacturing companies have already announced plans to build their own factories in the United States of America. In fact, even without legal ways to develop its microelectronics industry, China is ready to resort to illegal ones. For example, to data theft. In 2012, engineer Yu Junchao left ASML and founded a new company in America. He hired 2 employees from his former workplace who stole information that was a trade secret. All 2 million lines of source code for the software, critically important for production, were stolen. As a result, Junchao recreated the software in 2 years, a development that took ASML a decade. In 2018, ASML's lawyers sued Yu Junchao, accusing him of intellectual property theft, and the following year, a California court declared him a fugitive. However, Sun Quan lives in China and continues to work with the support of the government. The Chinese authorities deny the allegations against him, calling them an attempt to smear China. This is just one of many stories of Chinese industrial espionage. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is conducting thousands of cases on Chinese technological espionage. American politicians perceive the actions of the People's Republic of China as a threat to U.S. national security, as chips are an important component of modern weapons and intelligence systems. Semiconductor electronics are even equipped with portable missile systems like Javelin, not to mention more complex equipment like tanks and fighters. The development of artificial intelligence, impossible without advanced microchips, is considered by the United States and China to be the technology of the future. The White House is trying to take action on the restriction. In 2022 year, the Senate and President Joe Biden signed a law supporting the production of microchips. They plan to allocate $52 billion for the creation of the most modern devices, as well as provide a range of tax benefits to companies. America invented semiconductors. It's time to bring them home, Biden declared. However, before the states can become fully independent from other countries, there is still a long way to go. Companies from East Asia play a decisive role in the U.S. semiconductor industry, and it won't be possible to change this situation in the short term. Well, what about Russia? Russia essentially plays no role in the semiconductor resistance. The country's lag in the digital sphere began even during the Soviet Union. The country's situation was much reminiscent of where China is today. Soviet engineers were actively chasing the United States of America. They created a series of successful devices and ambitious projects, like a network of computing machines, a prototype of the communist Internet. In 1966, under the leadership of engineer-designer Leonid Kolesov, the Taganrog Radio Engineering Institute developed the first Soviet microcircuit, just 3 years after Jack Kilby from the United States of America. This American is considered the pioneer of the microchip, and 42 years later, in 2000, he received the Nobel Prize for his discovery. In the Soviet Union, mass production of circuits for electronics and computing machines was established by the mid-60s. However, the country was cut off from the global semiconductor industry and advanced technologies. As a result, it quickly fell behind in the development of microelectronics and resorted to simply copying Western devices. Things didn't get much better in post-Soviet Russia. Most developments were either analogs of foreign devices or assembled from foreign components at foreign factories. Russian enterprises are capable of creating microchips with transistors at 65 nanometers, that is, at the level of 2003-2008 years. But even their production could not be adjusted to the proper level. It is possible to produce household appliances on such schemes, but modern computers and smartphones definitely not. After February 22nd, the situation got even worse. Many Russian specialists emigrated. A significant portion of companies associated with semiconductors ceased operations in Russia and banned the supply of their products or industrial equipment. And domestic manufacturers ended up on the sanctions lists. For example, Russian companies cannot work with Taiwan's Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, as Taiwan has joined the sanctions. It was at these factories that the Baikal company, Baikal Electronics, assembled its processors. The idea was that Baikals should replace or at least become a cheaper alternative to American products. Domestic processors were planned to be used in computers and servers of large companies and government institutions for creating a sovereign internet. Russian officials wanted to transfer strategic sectors of the economy, from energy and defense to healthcare and transport to domestic electronics, and thus protect them from cyber attacks. The ministry planned to complete the transition to Russian software by 2023 and to Russian hardware by 2024. Now, it is definitely impossible to implement all this. However, Russia has managed to influence the global microchip market in some way. In Ukraine, the work of two neon cleaning companies, Mariupol's Ingaz and Odessa's Kryoin, has been suspended. Neon is needed for excimer lasers, which are used to make microchips. Ukrainian plants provided from 45 to 54% of the world's supply of this gas. On the 22nd of autumn, both enterprises were able to resume work, but only partially. Russia also remains one of the leaders in the semiconductor industry. It produces a significant portion of palladium used in microelectronics and hexafluorobutadiene used in the etching of silicon wafers. The microelectronics deficit that started during the pandemic persists today due to supply disruptions of these materials. After February of the 22nd year, they, as dual-use goods, fell under sanctions. At the same time, the most advanced samples of Russian weapons, such as drones and winged missiles, as well as modern aircraft, helicopters, artillery systems, and armored vehicles, depend on foreign electronics. Without microchips, communication, navigation, targeting, and fire control systems cannot work. The Russian army constantly needs to replenish its microchip supplies. That's why the Kremlin is actively buying them from China. The turnover of semiconductors between the countries has doubled, and only in the first 5 months of the second year amounted to $50 million. But, as mentioned above, China itself ended up in semiconductor isolation in 2022. Moreover, China's production still can't compete with that of the West, South Korea, or Taiwan. Therefore, the Russian authorities are implementing mechanisms to circumvent sanctions, borrowing the experience of North Korea and Iran. Microchips are purchased through intermediaries in China, Turkey, Malaysia, Mexico, Commonwealth of Independent States countries, and even Europe, on unregulated platforms through dummy individuals and firms, as well as companies that have not been sanctioned. Naturally, these chips are much more expensive. Russian authorities continue efforts to develop their domestic microchip industry. In 2024, a factory of the Moscow Institute of Electronic Technology should be built, which, according to plans, will produce chips with 28-nanometer transistors. But first of all, this is a technology of a decade ago. And secondly, as we have already figured out, the very idea is unrealistic, and this can be briefly seen in 4 theses. First, everyone is used to the fact that semiconductor chips are very cheap. It would seem that it is enough to set up a factory in Russia, and we will get the same cheap chips, only made at home. But it's not like that. A semiconductor factory consumes a huge amount of money, regardless of whether it produces something or not. And for one chip to be cheap, you need to spread this huge amount of money over a huge number of chips, tens of millions for an average factory. And they need to be sold somewhere. If there's nowhere to sell them, because the Russian market isn't that big, then the factory will incur losses, which either the government has to cover with subsidies. Then the chips will be cheap for the consumer, or the consumers themselves. Then the chips will be very expensive. So, if you want to make really cheap chips in your country, you need to sell them to the whole world. Second point, one factory cannot produce all microelectronic nomenclature. That is, processors, RAM, flash memory, microcontrollers, and radio modems cannot be thrown into one enterprise. The production of RAM is a separate branch of microelectronics with separate factories, processes, and players. In their time, the Germans tried to play this game, and the cost of their RAM chip was equal to the cost of a memory chip on a store shelf. The German company went bankrupt. It turns out that in order to have a fully localized production, you need to have several factories, and somewhere to sell the production of these factories, or maintain these factories operating at minimal load. The third point is equipment. As we have already noted, at the moment, there is not a single country in the world that would produce all the equipment necessary for microelectronics manufacturing using 45-nanometer technology and below. Making equipment for modern semiconductor manufacturing is very difficult, and starting from scratch is impossible. Modern equipment manufacturers have come a long way in decades, improving and perfecting their equipment. For example, a Dutch manufacturer of photolithographic equipment, the company spent about 15 years to perfect the setup. Besides this, there are also raw materials. The plant needs silicon wafers, liquid chemistry, especially photoresist, gases, photomasks, and many other things. And all of this is also not produced locally. Fourth moment, frames. For our hypothetical plant, we need to invite foreign specialists with their management technologies and then keep our specialists from emigrating. Because as soon as engineers-technologists become more or less experienced specialists, after a few years of experience in normal production, they start looking beyond the border.
The conclusion is clear.
You can't just take and build a microelectronics manufacturing plant. Such a plant requires a huge ecosystem, hundreds of millions of consumers, equipment, raw materials, staff. Moreover, this ecosystem is very large. With the disappearance of even one component, the whole system collapses. Creating such an ecosystem, completely isolated from the outside world, is impossible. It turns out that globalization is happening because it is impossible to advance alone, above a certain technological limit. No single country can handle it, only the whole world can. Will Russia be part of this world? Good question. It will be interesting to discuss in the comments under the video. Thank you for watching and see you in future releases on our channel.